Have you ever watched someone walk into a room knowing that every person inside expected them to fail? On that unforgettable evening, millions of viewers across America gathered around glowing television screens, expecting nothing more than another celebrity interview. Families sat together in their living rooms. Restaurant televisions played quietly in the background. Bars lowered the volume of conversations as one of the biggest names in entertainment prepared to appear live. Nobody could have imagined that before the night ended, the interview itself would become more famous than any song performed that year. People believed they were about to witness an ordinary conversation. Instead, they were about to watch a battle. Not a battle of fists, not a battle of fame, but a battle between arrogance and humility, between provocation and patience, between a man determined to humiliate another and a man who refused to surrender his dignity. Long before the first difficult question was asked, the outcome seemed obvious. The host had built his career on cornering famous guests. He was known for making actors lose their tempers, politicians contradict themselves, and athletes storm out of the studio. Viewers loved the tension. Television executives loved the ratings even more. Behind the bright studio lights, producers whispered excitedly, "This episode will be remembered forever." They were right, just not for the reason they expected. Because the guest sitting backstage was not an ordinary celebrity. He was Elvis Presley. The man whose voice had changed music, the man whose concerts filled arenas before the doors even opened, the man whose smile alone could send thousands of fans into tears. Yet those who truly knew Elvis often said something surprising. His greatest strength had never been his voice. It had never been his dancing. It had never even been his fame. His greatest strength was the calm he carried inside himself. That calm would soon be tested like never before. Backstage, assistants hurried through narrow hallways carrying cue cards, microphones, and stacks of production notes. Makeup artists rushed from one dressing room to another. Camera operators checked their equipment again and again. The atmosphere buzzed with excitement. Everyone sensed that something unusual was about to happen. Outside the dressing room door, the host quietly reviewed his notes. They were not ordinary interview questions. Each page contained carefully prepared traps, questions designed to embarrass, rumors presented as facts, quotes taken out of context, personal attacks disguised as curiosity. He smiled to himself. "If he loses his temper once," he whispered, "the headlines tomorrow will write themselves." One producer looked uncertain. "Are you sure we should push him this hard?" The host chuckled. People don't remember polite interviews. They remember disasters. Across the hallway, Elvis sat alone. No large entourage surrounded him. No loud conversations filled his room. No nervous pacing echoed against the walls. He simply adjusted the sleeves of his elegant black suit before looking into the mirror. For a brief moment, he studied his own reflection. Not the superstar, not the icon, just the man. He remembered something his mother had told him years earlier, when he was still a young boy with impossible dreams. "Son, the world will always give you a reason to become angry. But your character is revealed by the reasons you refuse." Those words had stayed with him through every concert, every success, every criticism, every mistake. And tonight, they quietly echoed inside his mind once again. A stage assistant knocked gently on the door. "Mr. Presley." "We're live in 2 minutes." Elvis smiled warmly. "Thank you." As he stood up, he straightened his jacket and picked up nothing except his confidence. No rehearsed speeches, no defensive arguments, no intention of defeating anyone. His only goal was simple: to remain himself. Meanwhile, inside the studio, hundreds of audience members filled every seat. Some wore Elvis merchandise, others came only to watch the famous interviewer challenge another celebrity. Camera cranes floated above the audience like giant mechanical birds. Massive spotlights flooded the stage with brilliant white light. The orchestra finished the opening theme. A bright red sign flashed above the cameras. Live. Instantly, every conversation disappeared. The host walked confidently toward the center of the stage. His smile looked friendly. His eyes did not. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's guest needs no introduction. The audience erupted before he even finished speaking. Applause thundered through the studio. People stood up. Some screamed. Others waved excitedly. The entrance curtain slowly opened. Then, Elvis Presley appeared, wearing his signature black suit tailored to perfection, polished shoes reflecting the studio lights, and a calm smile that seemed untouched by pressure. He walked onto the stage with effortless confidence. He did not wave dramatically. He did not seek attention. He simply acknowledged the audience with genuine warmth. The applause became even louder. For nearly a full minute, nobody could hear the host speaking. Some audience members wiped tears from their eyes, others simply stared. It was impossible to deny his presence. Even those who disliked his music respected the way he carried himself. The host applauded politely while forcing another smile. Inside, however, he felt something unexpected. The audience already belonged to Elvis. That irritated him. As they shook hands in the center of the stage, photographers captured dozens of flashes. The images would appear in newspapers across the country the next morning. To anyone looking at those photographs later, everything appeared perfectly normal. Two smiling men, a friendly handshake, a routine interview. But hidden behind that handshake, only one of them knew that the first attack had already been planned. The audience settled into silence. Both men took their seats. The cameras slowly zoomed closer. Millions of viewers leaned toward their television screens without realizing it. History was about to begin. The host folded his notes neatly on his desk. His smile remained. But his voice changed ever so slightly. It became colder, sharper, more deliberate. Elvis noticed it immediately. He simply folded his hands together and waited. Because sometimes, the strongest people in the room are not the first to speak. They are the ones patient enough to listen. And within the next few moments, the entire world would discover exactly what that meant. The moment both men settled into their chairs, the applause slowly faded. An uneasy silence spread across the studio. The bright lights overhead seemed hotter than before. The cameras rolled closer. Millions of people watching from their homes leaned toward their television screens without even realizing it. Every eye in the room was fixed on one man, Elvis Presley. The host rested his hands on the desk, his smile perfectly rehearsed. For a brief moment he looked down at his notes. Then he looked directly into Elvis's eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said with quiet confidence, "let's begin." The audience applauded politely. Elvis nodded with his familiar warm smile. "Thank you for having me." The host smiled back. "It is our pleasure." For a few moments everything appeared completely normal. They talked about music, about concerts, about Elvis's latest performances. The audience relaxed. Viewers at home settled comfortably into their chairs. Maybe this really was going to be another ordinary interview. That illusion lasted only a few minutes. The host suddenly placed his note cards on the desk. He folded his hands together. His expression changed. The warmth disappeared from his face. "So, Elvis," his voice became noticeably colder, "let us stop pretending." The studio instantly fell silent. Even the camera operators exchanged uncertain glances. Elvis remained perfectly still. "I've heard people say," the host continued, "that your success has very little to do with talent." A faint murmur spread across the audience. "They claim your popularity comes from clever marketing, screaming fans and headlines, not real musical ability." Several people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. No one had expected the interview to become this aggressive so quickly. The host leaned forward. "So, tell me, do you honestly believe people admire you because you deserve it?" The room became completely silent. Everyone waited. Some expected Elvis to defend himself. Others hoped he would lose his temper. The cameras zoomed closer. Elvis remained calm. A gentle smile appeared on his face. Then he answered quietly, "I don't believe admiration belongs to me. It belongs to every person who has ever believed in my music." The audience looked at one another. No anger, no excuses, no pride. Only gratitude. A few people began clapping. Then several more joined them. The applause slowly grew stronger. The host forced a smile. Inside, however, frustration was beginning to build. That answer had landed far better than he expected. He quickly moved to the next question. "Interesting. But another rumor has followed you for years." He paused intentionally. "They say fame has made you arrogant. You walk into every room believing you're the biggest star inside it." Several audience members gasped. A woman in the front row quietly shook her head. The host continued, "Isn't that true?" Again, every eye turned toward Elvis. He lowered his gaze for only a second before speaking. "My father taught me something when I was young. If you walk into a room believing you're better than everyone else, you've already become smaller than all of them." Silence. Not because people were bored, because nobody expected words that simple to carry that much weight. Then applause erupted once again. This time it lasted even longer. Some audience members stood briefly before sitting back down. The host felt his jaw tighten. Every question was producing the opposite effect. Instead of embarrassing Elvis, he was making him look wiser. The host reached for a glass of water. He took a slow sip before continuing. "Fine. You speak about humility, but surely you believe you're the greatest performer alive." The audience waited. It sounded like another trap. If Elvis answered yes, he would appear arrogant. If he answered no, the newspapers would accuse him of lacking confidence. The host smiled slightly. He believed there was no escape. Elvis noticed the trap immediately, yet his expression never changed. "There are singers whose voices are more beautiful than mine. There are dancers more graceful than I am. There are musicians who understand music more deeply." He paused. The entire studio listened. "But God never asked me to become someone else. He only gave me one responsibility, to become the best version of myself." For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then the audience exploded. The applause echoed through every corner of the studio. Several people stood to their feet. A man near the back shouted, "That's right!" The applause grew even louder. Backstage, producers stared at the monitors in disbelief. One assistant whispered, "This isn't going the way we planned." Another producer slowly nodded. No, it isn't. The host could feel the interview slipping away. He glanced toward the control room. No one came to rescue him. The audience was no longer reacting to his questions. They were reacting to Elvis. Every attempt to weaken him only seemed to strengthen him. Still, the host refused to surrender. He adjusted his tie. His fingers tightened around the microphone. His voice became sharper than ever before. Let's stop talking about philosophy. I have something much simpler. He opened a folder that had remained closed since the interview began. Inside were newspaper headlines, magazine articles, old rumors, anonymous accusations. He slowly placed the papers on the desk where every camera could see them. A ripple of curiosity spread through the audience. Even Elvis looked briefly at the stack of papers. The host smiled. This was the moment he had been waiting for all night. If words cannot shake him, perhaps his past will. He picked up the very first headline, looked directly into the camera, then back at Elvis. Ladies and gentlemen, I think it's finally time we ask the question that Mr. Presley has avoided for years. The audience stopped breathing. Even the applause that had filled the studio only moments earlier vanished completely. The silence became almost unbearable, and for the first time that evening, everyone wondered the same thing. Could even Elvis Presley remain this calm after what was about to be revealed? For several long seconds, no one moved. No one spoke. The entire studio seemed frozen beneath the brilliant white lights. The host slowly lifted the newspaper clipping from the stack. His smile returned. It was the smile of a man convinced that victory was only moments away. He adjusted the paper so every camera could capture it. Ladies and gentlemen, this headline claims that Elvis Presley has spent years carefully creating an image of humility, while privately believing he is untouchable. He lowered the paper and looked directly at Elvis. So let me ask you something. If everything people admire about you disappeared tomorrow, the fame, the money, the concerts, the applause, who would Elvis Presley be then? The audience became perfectly silent. This question felt different. It was no longer about music. It was no longer about success. It was personal. Millions of viewers stared at their television screens, waiting for the answer. The host leaned back confidently. He believed there were only two possible outcomes. Either Elvis would become defensive, or he would finally lose his composure. Instead, Elvis quietly folded his hands together. He looked down for only a brief moment before raising his eyes again. There was no anger, no fear, no bitterness, only peace. My mother once told me something I have never forgotten. The room remained silent. When people clap for you, they are applauding what you do. But when they still respect you after the applause is gone, they are honoring who you are. Several audience members slowly lowered their heads. Elvis continued. So if everything disappeared tomorrow, the music, the stage, the spotlight, I would still wake up grateful. I would still thank God for another morning. I would still try to treat people with kindness, and I would still be Elvis. The words echoed across the studio. No dramatic music, no raised voice, just simple honesty. The host looked down at his notes. For the first time all evening, he had nothing prepared. Still unwilling to admit defeat, he asked one final question. So, are you saying I have failed to embarrass you? A few people nervously glanced toward Elvis. Everyone sensed that this would be the final exchange. Elvis smiled. Not the smile of someone celebrating victory, the smile of someone who genuinely wished the other person well. He looked directly into the host's eyes. "I don't believe this evening was about winning or losing." The host frowned. Elvis continued, "You weren't testing my reputation. You were testing my patience. And patience is not something another person can take away. It is something we choose to keep." He paused, then added quietly, "If someone insults me, I have two choices. I can become the person they expect, or I can remain the person I know I am. I chose the second." Complete silence. The host opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. His carefully prepared arguments suddenly felt meaningless. The cameras remained focused on him. Millions of viewers watched as the man famous for always having the last word searched desperately for one more question. There wasn't one. Several long seconds passed, then a single pair of hands began to clap. An elderly man sitting near the back of the audience slowly stood to his feet. He continued applauding. A woman beside him stood as well. Then another, and another. Within moments, the entire studio rose together. The applause became deafening. People were cheering. Some were wiping tears from their eyes. Even members of the camera crew quietly smiled behind their equipment. The standing ovation continued. 1 minute passed, then another. The applause only grew louder. The host slowly looked around the studio. For the first time in his career, the audience was not applauding because of a clever question. They were applauding because they had witnessed something far more powerful: character. He slowly stood from his chair, walked toward Elvis, extended his hand. His voice was quieter than it had been all evening. "I owe you an apology. I invited you here believing I could expose your weaknesses. Instead, you exposed one of mine." The audience applauded once again. Elvis immediately shook his hand. "There is nothing to apologize for. We all have something to learn." The host looked down for a moment before speaking again. "Tonight, I learned that confidence never needs to shout, and dignity never needs to prove itself." Elvis gently smiled. "The strongest people aren't the ones who always have the perfect answer. They're the ones who refuse to let anger speak for them." The audience erupted into one final standing ovation. As the cameras slowly pulled back, the image became unforgettable. Two men standing together beneath the bright studio lights. One had entered the interview hoping to win an argument. The other had entered simply hoping to remain true to himself. Only one achieved his goal. When the broadcast finally ended, newspapers across the country wrote about the remarkable interview. Television commentators replayed the final moments for weeks. People didn't remember a scandal. They didn't remember an insult. They remembered a lesson. Parents showed the interview to their children. Teachers spoke about it in classrooms. Speakers quoted it during leadership seminars, not because Elvis Presley had defeated another man, but because he had defeated something far more dangerous: the temptation to answer disrespect with disrespect. Years later, people would still talk about that extraordinary evening, not as the night when a famous host tried to embarrass Elvis Presley, but as the night the entire world witnessed the quiet strength of a man who understood that true greatness is never measured by the loudness of your voice. It is measured by the calmness of your heart when the whole world is trying to shake it. And that is why, long after the applause faded and the studio lights were turned off, people remembered not the questions that were asked, but the character of the man who answered them.